Well, hello, welcome to the channel. My name's Johnny, and you're watching Hillbilly Modeling. So this is going to be part one of our ICM Standard B Liberty Series 2 World War I US Army Truck in 1/35th scale. And what we're going to be doing is, well, getting started on the build. So I hope to get everything all the way through, at least the wheels, done in this video. So let's see how far we get. So let's jump down to the bench and get to building. Okay, so the way ICM has these laid out, they're really simple steps, so we're not going to go to the instructions every single time we do something, or we're going to be here forever. So we're going to start there with step number one. That's putting the rear spring together and then assembling that onto the side rail, and that's the right side rail. And then the spring for the front cross members, of course the radiator there, you can see that. And then they want us to put those cross members in, and then, there we go, sorry, I was out of frame. And then do the other side rail, and then assemble that together, and then put the radiator in. So, well, let's just go ahead and get started with it and see how far we go, because I think we're going to do the frame just a little bit differently than the way they describe it here in the instructions. So starting with the rear spring, there are two halves, but now as you can see here, these are the sprue gates, and they're kind of in between the shackles on the springs there. So that's kind of be a little bit of a problem if we try to cut that out of there. As you can see with a regular craft knife, that's going to be a problem. So what I have is a new tool, well, new to me. So this is a modeling chisel. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use that to get rid of those sprue gates. Now this is a really sharp chisel, so you need to be careful with it. And my hand's going to be in the way here, I'm sure. So we're just going to rotate it up vertical there. And I'm using a wooden block just to clip that off. And let's see what we got. Ah, very nice. So that's going to clean up nicely. And just a little bit of scraping there. So we do have these to do on all the springs. So we'll go ahead and take care of that. So for the rear spring, it is two halves. And I guess maybe they molded it this way because they didn't want any well, what do you call it? The sinks, you know, that you can get sometimes in when they injection mold these. So by doing it this way, we get the thickness, but we don't have to worry about any short shots or or any sinkholes or anything like that in it. So we'll just go ahead and glue these up. So they do kind of tend to bow out from one another a little bit, so a little bit of extra thin there. And that clamp helps a lot too. So once that glue takes hold, we don't have any issues, or I should say cement. Now you can see here that the front spring goes together the same way. The only difference is that the outside half is already molded onto the actual frame rail, so we don't have to worry about attaching it once we get it together. So just making sure that everything's lined up, and it lines up nicely. So now we do have a seam line there, of course, and I am just going to sand that a little bit, kind of knock it down, being careful that we don't bevel the ends of these little leaves here for the leaf spring. Once we do that, we can come back in and kind of clean it up real close, just using our regular hobby knife there. And then once you do that, I like to go ahead and just run over it with a little light coat of, to me, extra thin, kind of melt away anything that's left over there. And that'll clean these springs up for us. So when it comes to assembling it onto, now this is the rear spring. The front one's already on, so we don't have to worry about that. You can't get this backwards, okay? So if you do, you have tried really, really hard. But as you can see, it just slots into place. You just want to make sure that it's fully seated. That way we're not throwing off the geometry here and having it tilt out or tilt in, because that would be bad for our axle alignment. So making sure that everything's seated good. And once that tacks up for us, we can move on. So there is this little cap that goes on to the front spring hanger here. Yep, and I just dropped it. Try not to lose these. I just put a little of the cement on there first, and then we just set that into place. And the way it slots in, you cannot get it backwards, so that's good. Just want to make sure that it's fully seated before we move on. So we're going to start building up these two cross members that are in the instructions. Now this is a center cross member, and it has these linkages on here. And I guess I could make the assumption, I believe this has something to do with the brakes. But the way, as you can see there, it's just kind of loose in the little slots where it keys in. So we'll just put a little bit of To-Me Extra Thin on there, and then we'll be able to flip it over and make sure that we got the alignment right, because it does slide back and forth just a little bit. We do want it center, and by using those center sections there, we can kind of make sure that we're in alignment. All right. So the next cross member is our rear cross member that has our towing pintle on it, and it simply slots into place. Now it's kind of an offset diamond, so that you're not supposed to be able to get it backwards. I've just pulled it out with the cement. So just make sure that you get it lined up. It should be nice and straight. Well, as straight as I can get it anyway. So easy peasy, isn't that right? So now when it comes to our radiator, it has two halves. We have a front half and a rear half. So want to make sure that we get that lined up. Simple to put together, and then we'll go ahead and cement that into place. So now if we take a look at this radiator here, you'll see across the top of it there, we have this big sink right in the center there where the seams are. And it's really not supposed to be that way. So I found this picture on the World Wide Web there, and if you can see that top tank there on our radiator, it doesn't have such a feature. It's basically a curved, smooth surface, and what that means is if we want our truck to look like the real thing, then we're probably going to have to fill that, and that's unfortunate, but we could take care of that. That's not a problem. Well, did I say not a problem? Well, of course it's going to be a problem. It always is when you got to fill things. But anyway, this is sprue goo. Now, sprue goo is basically dissolved leftover sprues from previous models. So it's just polystyrene that's been put into some To-Me Extra Thin. And To-Me Extra Thin is actually a solvent. It's not a glue. So it will dissolve that plastic sprue, and then you get this nice gooey stuff, so we call it sprue goo. Now, I didn't invent this, so that credit goes to somebody else. Who, I don't know. I'm sure it's been around for a while. But the good thing is we can use it to fill the large areas here, and after it dries, we can sand it just like you would regular plastic. So that being the case, sprue goo is really good for adding structural, if I can say that right, structural integrity, as well as it sands just like regular plastic, because it kind of is. Once the solvent sets off and it dries, then you're left with the polystyrene. So that's good. So our next assembly is our steering gear, and it's a simple two-part affair here, and we'll simply cement that together. Now this is going to end up mounting to the inside section of the the left frame rail. So we're just going to put this together for now. And yeah, that's what it looks like. Simple assembly. So going back to our instructions, that's what we just did there. Now it's step 8. That was a steering gear. And now we're going to step 9. Now, they want us to put all these frame rails in here. These are our cross members. Not rails, but members. Our cross members in between our frame rails. And then they want us to assemble the opposite side. But if we, oh, there's that steering gear, that's where it goes, and then put those two together. I think the best thing for us to do is we're going to skip over putting the cross members in right now and go ahead and do the frame rail so that it's going to be ready for us, and put our steering gear already in it, and then we'll do those center sections, because we don't want those to, you know, kind of set up and cause a mess for us, especially if they dry and get too solid for us to be able to flex and move. Then our frame is not going to line up properly. So we'll go ahead and put our steering gear into place, and it's kind of a, it's not really a teardrop, it's kind of an arch kind of slot and peg assortment. Just make sure you get it seated all the way down so that it has a proper alignment. And as you can see, it kind of angles back a little bit there. So just make sure that it's all the way seated, hopefully, so that it will line up with our steering column when we go to put the cab on. So now it's time to go ahead and start putting in these cross members. So we will attach them to the right side frame rail, just like the instructions said. And the way they fit in, you can't really get it wrong. So ICM has done a really good job of making sure that it's really clear how these go together. We do have a spreader tube here for the rear suspension. Just kind of put a little bit of to me extra thin there and kind of get it to tack up a little bit and stick. And we'll move on down the rail, putting in each one of the cross members. Now this is the one that we assembled previously with the linkages on it. I just want to make sure that I get it square, or as square as I can. So the whole idea here is we are going to let these kind of tack up for a few minutes. Give it, 5, 6, 7 minutes. 10 minutes is not even an issue, because it's still kind of pliable at that point. But we don't want these to be falling out and us knocking them loose, when we try to set the other frame rail into place. So we want these to be seated all the way flat against the inside of that frame rail, and have them cemented in and fairly square to the frame, because these pieces do go across. So after we give that just a few minutes to set up, now we can start working on setting the other side of the frame. So basically all of our cross members are still in a pliable state. We can still shift them, but we don't have to worry about them falling out. So that's kind of important. So one thing I noticed right off the bat here is that the two that really want to line up first are the two center ones. That's the one with the linkages on it. And then the rear one and then that little tube there really don't want to kind of sit. And that's because these frame rails have a slight bow to them, so it's not that big of a deal. We're going to draw all that together. So we will start off with the two that actually are in contact with the rail. And we will start cementing them to the opposite rail there. That's a lot of rails. At any rate, you guys kind of get the picture. So we'll start with this one right here, the large one with the linkages on it. And I'm just going to hold it just for a few seconds to let it kind of grab hold for us. And then we'll move on and cement the next one. And these are the two center ones here. And we'll do the same thing there. You're going to hold it just long enough to make sure that it kind of grabs hold. We don't want this spreading apart on us while we're kind of fidgeting with with the other pieces. And then we'll move straight on back to the rear here. We will do that, that rear cross member and then also our tube section. And we just want those to tack up for us. That way they're not pulling apart. And this plastic is really, really soft. Okay, it's very, very springy and and easy to bend. So what we want to do is we want to get this clamp down, and I need a good flat surface for it. So I'm just going to use a flat piece of board here that I have laying around, which comes in handy to have things like this. And then we'll just set in some clamps there to hold everything together for us. Now the ideal here is by letting it set on a flat surface, and we're going to weight this down so that it's in contact with our flat surface. And I'm using that board because there's a bracket on the front rail that kind of prohibits us from laying it flat on our cutting mat. So I'll just use my To Me Extra Thin for now to hold this down. Of course, any bottle of paint or anything that has a little bit of weight to it will be fine. Just want to make sure that the rail is sitting nice and flat. So now this is the top half of the rear axle housing, and I did cut it off, and we're going to set that on top of the springs. We're not going to glue it in place. We're just going to use that as a spacer to make sure that our springs are aligned correctly. And hopefully I've got it squared correctly. We're going to kind of set this off to the side and let this dry. And once we're satisfied, give it 20 minutes or so, and then we're probably okay. Now, you can wait till tomorrow if you like. It doesn't really matter. About 20 minutes is about all you need. So I did not glue that front cross member into place. And as you can see there, that one rail it's kind of got a little twist to it. But I think we can eliminate that. That shouldn't be, I hope, that much of an issue. And we'll see how this works out. All right, let's take a look at our instructions here. And this is where we're at, step 14. Now we're going to leave this radiator out. And we're also going to leave off this bracket fender bracket. Get that right. And our front axle and this other cross member will be 29. We'll put that in. And then, of course, we've got our very front cross member there, which will help us to alleviate a little bit of that twist that's in the front of that frame. So we're going to start off with this cross member here. It has all the holes in it. It just slides into place. So we're going to work our way forward, and we will cement that into place and let that tack up for us. Now, since we have all the other cross members, they're already fairly dry. We don't have to worry about anything shifting on us. We do want to make sure that that is fully seated, though, before it completely tacks up. And when it comes to this front, we have that one cross member that's under the engine there. I'm using a clamp here to help keep it vertical, to make sure that we are getting a good contact. If I can get my clamp to clamp on there, it's not behaving for me. So once we get that, we can go ahead and cement it into place. And a little bit To Me Extra Thin there. And now we are going to use our front axle. Now there are two little holes, one on each side of it there, for the actual tie rod. And we want to make sure that those holes are facing towards the rear of the vehicle. And now we can set that front axle right into place. And this is going to help us spread that spring out, and that'll help take care of the rest of that twist. Or at least that's my theory. So let's go ahead and we'll fix that into place. And we do want to check our alignment, because you can get it tilted, and we don't want that. We want it straight up and down. So it should be 90 degrees to the frame rail. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part. And that's going to be that front cross member. and we'll just simply set it into place here. It does seem to be just a little bit loose, so I think a little bit of extra thin there to tack it into place for us. That'll kind of hold it for us until we can get it cemented all the way to each one of the frame rails, both left and right there. And we want to make sure that that's a good solid connection there for us, because we don't want that to come loose. That would be bad. We don't like bad things. Okay, so let's see. We finished 14. Now we've left the radiator out. We're not going to put that in yet. And we're going to move on. Now this is step 15 through 19. So we have our worm drive housing and our axle housing and our wheel ends and all that to put together. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So first up is our worm gear housing, drive shaft housing. It's a worm gear machined onto a shaft. So, okay. So anyway, we'll go ahead and put this together. Very simple. And then of course the cap for the back of it, we need to put that on, and the way it's keyed, and the way they've molded this, you can't get it backwards. It goes on very well, it goes on only one way, so we'll put that into place. There we go. And then next, we're looking at our housing. Now the way this goes together towards the rear of it, it's got a little bit of a cutout there. And that little cutout, as you can see, where that housing sits right over top of this little triangular piece here on our rear, or the bottom section of our rear housing. And the reason why I mentioned this is because you can get these two housings flipped around. There's no positive way to keep you from putting that on backwards. So to make sure the orientation's correct, you do need to take note of that. And then all we got to do is run a little bit of cement there around the seam. Now you don't have to really worry about cleaning up that seam, because that's where a weld seam would be on the actual housing. And then we can go ahead and install the worm drive housing on top. And a little bit of cement for that. And that'll take care of that for us. So we do have this seam across that worm drive housing there, and we're just going to hit that with a little bit of a sanding stick here, kind of smooth it out. Will it ever be seen? Well, probably absolutely not. I mean, it's up underneath the truck bed, so once the model's fully assembled, probably we'll never see it, but we'll take care of it anyway, so we don't have to worry about it. And next up, I think this is a drain plug. It's a little weird, but it's just a little triangular piece with a tube on it, and it just cements into its slot there. So we'll put that on, and then I'll just use some To Me Extra Thin to kind of take care of the sprue gate on it. And next up, we have these bottom plates. Now these are the plates that the U-bolts go through to hold the rear axle to the rear springs. And the way they're keyed, you can't get them wrong, and both plates are identical, so you don't have an issue there. And we'll just go ahead and install both of those. And you do want to make sure, of course, that they are fully seated. And as usual, I tend to use more To Me Extra Thin than I need to, but I will make an extra pass on these just to make sure that everything has its best opportunity to stay in place. So now when it comes to our wheel ends, the wheel ends are the plates that hold our brakes. And there are two little bitty holes you can see there either side of that keyway. They should be going down towards the ground. That's where our linkages are going to go. And so I have noticed, though, that this is a little wobbly, and we can't have wobbly. That's not going to work. So, since I already put to me extra thin, let's put some more on there. And to me extra thin, since it's a solvent, it'll soften this plastic up. And as I mentioned before, that plastic is really soft, so it should help us get a good weld here. And just a little bit of wiggling with it there. That to me extra thin will soften everything up and allow us to get a good seat. I mean, you could do a lot of filing, and I don't think it's really all that necessary. I think that the to me extra thin will take care of it. And there's a good look at those two little locator holes there opposite of the slot that goes onto the axle. So just make sure that those are in the down position towards the ground. So I'm going to take my rule here and I'm going to go around and measure to kind of, well, it's probably more of a thing for me mentally to see if I am really way out on one or the other, because they really need to be square as you can get them, because that's going to affect how the rear wheels are going to set, because they actually cement right to those plates, which would be our brake drums. Okay, so we've got our rear axle together. Next up, we need to put in our tie rod assembly, and that's for the steering. So we will do that. And then we also have our brake linkages. There are two for the left and two for the right, and they go into those holes that I mentioned before. So that's why it's important that those holes be down towards the ground, and make sure that you don't get those backing plates upside down. So need to pay attention to that. All right, so on to our tie rod. Now those two little holes that I talked about before, you need to make sure that they're facing towards the rear of the vehicle, because that's where the tie rod goes. The tie rod usually is not going to be in front of the axle, because the front of the axle can take damage, you know, pushing dirt and mud and rocks and stuff like that. So you do want your tie rod to be trailing behind. So we're just a little bit of to me extra thin there, and we'll just line those up and set them into place. And that's kind of what that's supposed to look like. All right, so moving right along. Time to put in our brake linkages here. So these are rods and levers, and there's one forward and one aft. That's almost a nautical term, and one to the front and one to the rear. So as you can see, it's not a big issue. It goes right in, and we need to go ahead and put the one on the opposite side. And when you get them in, they look like that. So I need to go ahead and do the opposite side, but you kind of get how that's supposed to look. So that should look fine. So we do have our drag link. Now our drag link comes from our steering gear over to the axle itself. That's for our steering, and we'll need to put that into place. And it does have this loop on it. It's really not, it doesn't, the instructions really doesn't do us any good there. It's hard to see that loop, but it kind of loops down from above. So when you do your test fit, you'll kind of see how that's supposed to work. So we will go ahead and test fit that. So the drag link is above the axle, and then that connecting rod is actually a loop there, comes down and connects to our spindle there. So we will go ahead and put a little bit of to me extra thin there on our steering gear. That'll kind of tack it into place for us. And make sure that we get the right orientation here. And get that little loop to go down like it's supposed to towards the axle. And just hold it there just for a couple of seconds to tack up. And then we'll go back in and cement the other end of it. Now there's not a locator hole there for that little loop. It just kind of sits there. So But it makes contact, and that's what it's supposed to look like there. We're going to call that a success. Okay. So in that same step, we are attaching our rear axle. So I'm going to go ahead and put some to me extra thin there on those locator studs. Well, studs, tabs. There we go. And we just want to make sure that the input for our drive shaft is pointing forward. I probably shouldn't have to mention that, but I will. It's possible to get that backwards, so try not to do that. Okay, so a little bit of multitasking here. I have sanded down the hump that our sprue goo has left on the top of our radiator and also on the bottom, and just to knock it down. So I'm kind of happy with that. However, there are still some gaps there, and we are going to fill those with perfect plastic putty because they are relatively shallow. And we're just going to spread that putty on there. And we'll also do this for the bottom tank on the radiator, and a little bit on the sides there to cover up those seams, because those seams from the assembly of the front and rear half of the radiator, they're not supposed to be there. So we're going to try our best to get those things filled up. So while that's drying, we're going to move on to the bumperettes. So we have these two little brackets, and those fit into those L slots on the rear cross member. So orientation is about everything. Just make sure you don't put that rear cross member in backwards. As you can see, that would make these brackets in backwards, and we don't want that. So we get those lined up and get them in there and get them as square to that cross member as we can. Just make sure that they're as fully seated there. So far the fit's been great, no issues. And then we do have our pads, which they're probably wooden blocks. I don't know for sure, but those, we just need to cement those into place, and we will do that on both the left and the right side. And then we want to check our alignment, make any adjustments that are necessary, because they should be flat straight across, and then they should be even with one another. Alright, so moving to our front fender brackets. Now these are the forward brackets. They have a slot cut out into the frame rail that these brackets go into. Now we've saved both these brackets to do until now because we really needed to have the frame all cemented up and straight, and well, I think it's straight before we do this, because the vehicle really doesn't look right if the fenders look like they're flapping their wings, or they're drooping, or they're the alignment is kind of important here. So we waited to put these brackets into place so that we could check that. Now if you do it as it says in the instruction, and you put the brackets on before you put all the frame together, then you may find that your brackets don't line up left and right. And that's going to affect our actual fender alignment left and right. So you don't want that to happen. So now is probably a good time to go ahead and fix this broken part. Now this was just laying loose in the bag here. And what these two little uprights are is for the grill guard. So we need to actually kind of get that on, I guess. So we can always do that later, but I think now's a good idea before I lose it. Alright, so we've taken care of all of that. And now we can move on to our fenders. So we have our front fender to put together, and they even give us a kind of an angle guide there of what that should look like. And they want us to install that fender, and then later on we install the other one, but we're going to do them both at the same time. We need to put together the springs and the front bumper, and then we can start working on our transmission there. and get that all put together along with our drive shaft and get all that installed. So that should be fairly simple and straightforward. So here we have our fenders. Now we're doing both the fenders at the same time. We're not going to do it like they want us to do it in the instructions. And I'm just about to make a mistake. There we go. Flip that around. Make sure that you've got your bracket on correctly there. We'll cement that into place. And then looking at the instructions there, we want to check and make sure that that angle is correct. As you can see, I'm a little bit off there, so it kind of should be perpendicular of that surface there. It's a curved surface, so just square it up as best you can there, I guess. So both fenders go together the same way with the bracket. Now when we go to install these fenders, there is a slot in the forward section for that previously mounted bracket. So that's the front bracket. We just want to make sure that we cement it to that first, just like so. And then all you got to do is push the fender down until the corner of it right there is setting right on top of the actual spring the leaf spring bracket. And then a little bit of to me extra thin, and we'll just press this together for the fender bracket. There is no locating hole for this rear fender bracket, so that's the best way I think to do that. Now we have our front bumper to assemble. So we have this, it's kind of like a leaf spring that goes onto the back side of it here. So we'll cement that up, and one side seems to fit better than the other, but a little bit of, to me, extra thin there will soften the plastic, and then we'll be able to put our coil springs on. Now these coil springs are a two-piece affair. I went ahead and put them together because they're really small, as you can see. But there is the side where it's on the sprue, and then the other side where you don't have the sprue gate. So I just made sure that I aligned the sprue gate side to the bottom, and the tops actually, they look really nice. I mean, so it's not that big of an issue. If we have to clean it up later, we will. So this is our transmission, and we have this input-output section to put in. It's the way it's designed, you can't get it backwards, because if you do, it just will not go together. And then we'll put the top cap on. And once we get that into place, and again, you can't get this backwards. It'll only go one way. And we'll cement it up. And once we get that, then we have, as you can see, right in the side of that gearbox, goes this lever, and I'm sure that's the shift lever for it. I don't know how many gears this thing had. It might have been a 2-speed with a reverse, or it might have been a single speed. I don't know, but anyway, we'll cement that into place. That would be an interesting research project, I guess, to see how many gears it had. All right, so after checking the fit, there is no possible way to put the drive shaft in if you don't do it now. And the instructions tells us to go ahead and do it now, so we're going to do that. Now, of course, we're not going to set this aside. We're going to go ahead and install it because we don't want that drive shaft to be crooked. And then we simply put our gearbox into place on the frame. Yeah, bad angle. Sorry about that. And really good fit. Can't complain about that at all. And we'll just go ahead and cement all those little legs and tabs and brackets into place there. Next up, we have our front bumper. And it just sits on those two little pegs there. And that's really it. I mean, I'm amazed that it's fitting so well, but it really is. And we just have to cement everything into place there. All the parts are lining up really nice. I mean, other than that twist and that one little broken part we had, it looks pretty good. All right, so back to our instructions, and now we're off to our wheels. We have a front wheel, the inners, and the outers with the hubs, and then we join those together. Looks pretty simple. I think we can manage that. Let's give it a shot. So we will start with our front wheel assembly. Now pay attention to the parts. Call out for these because we are using the cast wheels and not the I don't know, wooden spoked or whatever they were. But now these do not have any alignment pins or anything. It just simply slides together. And then the same thing when it comes to the inner wheel for our duals on the rear. No tabs whatsoever. You just stick it on there and cement that up. And then the outers for our duals on the back there. Same process. Couldn't be easier. The only difference here is that we do have a hub, since it's on the outside, obviously. And we'll just put that hub into place. I am cementing this from the back side. That way I don't have to worry about, you know, melting something on the front, I guess. So that's what that's supposed to look like. And of course you make 2 each of all of these. Now when you go to join the duals, they do have an alignment pin. There are 2 little alignment pins and it'll only go one way. So we will just put that together and get that cemented up. Easy peasy. That's what it's supposed to look like. Very nice. They've done a great job with their engineering on this kit. So when it comes to the front hubs here, we've got the B51 and the B64. So we have an option here, or at least they give us an option. However, when I was looking at the sprue, the B51s, there is only one. That's it. Only one. And then down here where the 64s are, there are 2. So since we have 2 front wheels and not one, guess which one we're going to use? Yeah, we'll be using the B64s. So simple. It goes on the same way as the other. The rear hubs went on. Simply put them into place and cement them in, and that's it. So let's take a look and see what we got here. And that's kind of what that looks like. Very nice. Now these are not going to stay into place, and besides, for painting purposes, we will paint them separately and we will glue them on later. Well, all right. At least we got through to the wheels. That's good. One of the things I want to talk about though is this radiator. I think they could have molded it better, but they did what they did, and we've had to fill that big groove up there. I put the sprue goo in there to take up most of that space, and I've sanded that down flush, and then I went back in with some perfect plastic putty. I think next though I'm probably going to use some Mr. Surfacer 500 on it to help get rid of anything else that's left, so that we got, especially on this top cap up here, because it's supposed to be basically smooth. In some pictures you can see a little weld line on there, but it's still kind of flat across there. It's not concave like it was when we assembled it. So I still have all that to work on and get that going. As far as the frame goes though, all that went together really well, and I was kind of worried because we had that one side that had that little twist in it. One of the things that I recommend is that the forward fender supports there, yeah, these right here, in the instructions they tell us to put those on as we build up the frame on that particular side. Leave those off until you get the whole frame together, and all the little tweaks and things out of it there. That way you can actually lay a ruler across the top and make sure that you got the those front fender supports up like they're supposed to go. And the other thing is that there are no locator pins for the rear fender support there, right there on the frame. Just let the corner of that fender sit down on top of the rear spring hanger there for the front suspension, and then that little piece will just go flat up against the frame and just cement that into place there. So those two things, and really, I guess that's it. So that looks really good. We got our transmission in, and it's looking really good. I'm really surprised at how well we got that little awkward twist out of that frame. And this is a really soft plastic. Just to let you know that right up front. It's not brittle at all. As a matter of fact, wait a minute. Let me see here. This is our old B1 sprue, or what's left of it. As you can see, this stuff is just, yeah. You can see that it's just, it is really, really springy, you know. So it's it kind of gives you a little bit of trouble when you try to sand it. You need to use just a little bit coarser of a grade of sanding stick or sandpaper when you go to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't really do a lot. It like flexes back. So now the other thing that I need to do, as you can see these wheels, well, hopefully, see how they have a high center on them there? Yeah, they should be flat. Now they might have been molded like that from the factory. I believe this is more like the mold process from making the model, but we're going to have to take care of that, because once these things run just a little bit, that little curved surface area is going to come right down. And if you look at any of the photographs or anything on the historical vehicles, you would see that they're not humped up in the middle at all. So they're always flat. So, and those were solid tires. They didn't have any air in them, so you didn't have to worry about a flat tire, I guess. But brings us to the next thing, and that would be that oftentimes there was little chunks that, just like road wheels on a track vehicle, little chunks of rubber will get tore out of them. So something for us to think about later on in the build. So that's it for this part. Look for part 2. We'll continue the build. That'll be next Friday. And so special thanks to all my subscribers. Just because of you guys that I keep making these videos. And I hope that you enjoyed this one. If so, don't forget to give a like. And if you're new to the channel and not a subscriber, I hope today I earned that subscription. So until next Friday, guys, you guys stay safe.